All right. Welcome to POP Podcast, everybody. Buckle up because today's going to be juicy. We're diving into a legal whirlwind that's got everyone talking and involves someone you might remember from like the early 2000s, Sean Kingston. Beautiful girls, that whole vibe. Yeah, him. So he and his mom, Janice Turner, were just found guilty of, get this, federal fraud down in Florida. Crazy, right, Eva?
Oh, absolutely. It's been everywhere since like yesterday when the news broke, March 28th, 2025. And looking at all the stuff you've got here, it's wild. Like it really makes you think about all the stuff that goes on behind the scenes with, celebrities, business, and the whole legal mess. This isn't just a little scandal. This is serious.
Yeah, no kidding. It's like a train wreck you can't look away from. So we've got all the details here, the charges, the timeline, the whole shebang, and we're going to unpack it all. We want to go deeper than those clickbait headlines and really figure out what went down. What were they actually accused of? Who are the victims? And what does this say about, the whole celebrity world? So let's start at the beginning with the big news.
Yeah.
The verdict.
Okay, so the most important thing to get right off the bat is that both Sean Kingston and his mother, Janice Turner, were found guilty on all counts, every single one. Federal wire fraud. And this wasn't even close. The jury was unanimous. Like, they only talked for 3.5 hours before they came back with the guilty verdict.
Yeah.
Just gotta tell you something.
3.5 hours. Wow. That does seem really fast, especially with so many businesses involved. Can you remind everyone which companies they were accused of defrauding? It wasn't just like one place, right?
Oh, no, not at all. The indictment names 4 different businesses. A jewelry place, a company that makes those super fancy beds, the ones you only see in magazines. Then there's a dealership for like crazy expensive cars, used but like Lamborghinis and stuff. And then a company that sells these top-of-the-line micro LED TVs. So we're talking luxury goods here. Big money.
Oh, yeah. Serious cash. And this wasn't just a one-time thing either, right? This wasn't just, oops, I made a mistake. This was going on for a while.
Right. It went on for years, actually. The indictment says it started way back and only stopped in March of last year, 2024. So yeah, this was a pattern, not an accident.
Okay, so how did they pull this off? I mean, it sounds like Sean Kingston's fame was a big part of it. Like, how did he use that according to the charges?
Well, basically, the prosecution argued that Kingston used his celebrity status and all his social media followers to make himself seem super trustworthy, like, I'm famous, so I'm good for it. So he allegedly convinced these businesses to send him all this expensive stuff, promising to pay them later, but then nothing. Classic, trust me, I'm rich and famous, but turned into a crime.
The ultimate name drop gone wrong. Okay, but what about his mom? Was she, just along for the ride? Or was she more involved?
No, it sounds like she was pretty hands-on. The indictment says Janice Turner was all over the logistics. She'd be the one contacting the businesses, making sure the deliveries are happening, on schedule and stuff. They were a team, basically.
Huh? So she was the one making sure they actually got all the fancy stuff. Okay, and then the payment part, or the lack of payment. That's where the wire fraud comes in, right? It's not like they were writing bad checks.
Exactly. They were allegedly using fake wire transfers. So the businesses would get what looked like a confirmation of payment, and they'd ship the goods, but then, poof, the money's gone, or the transfer bounces or something. And the worst part, Kingston allegedly kept all this expensive stuff, didn't give it back or anything. And wire fraud, it's not a joke. It's a federal crime. They use electronic communication to trick people out of money. And the punishments are, really serious if you get convicted.
Yeah, those are some high-stakes stuff. So, all right, let's rewind a bit and talk about how this whole legal thing started. They didn't just end up in court overnight. I remember reading about their arrest. It was out of a movie or something.
Yeah, it was crazy. Last May, Kingston was arrested in Fort Irwin, California. But get this, before that, there was a SWAT team raid on his house in Florida. Southwest Ranches, they didn't mess around.
The SWAT team. Wow, that's intense. So things escalated quickly. And then a few months later, the official charges came out.
Yep. July of 2024. A federal grand jury indicted both Kingston and Turner on all those fraud charges.
And they didn't plead guilty or anything, did they?
Nope. Not guilty all the way. They stuck to their story, which is why they had the trial and ended up with the guilty verdict.
And like we said earlier, that jury did not take long to decide. 3.5 hours for a federal fraud case with multiple victims and years of alleged scheming. It makes you wonder how strong the evidence must have been. What do you think about that super fast verdict?
I'd say that usually means the prosecution did a really good job. They laid out all the evidence so clearly that the jury was convinced, no problem. There wasn't much room for doubt.
Makes sense. Okay, so guilty verdicts are in. What happens now? What are they facing? And what's next for Kingston and his mom?
Well, sentencing is set for July 11th. But for now, their situations are pretty different. Kingston is under house arrest with, one of those ankle bracelets. He also had to put up a huge bond to make sure he shows up for sentencing. His house, which is worth like $500,000 and $200,000 in cash.
So, stuck at home, but not in jail. His mom, though, didn't get so lucky, did she?
No, Janice Turner went straight to jail after the verdict. She's staying there until their sentencing in July. That probably means the judge was worried she might try to run away or, cause more trouble.
Wow, that must have been a heavy scene in the courtroom. Our sources said they were both crying when they heard the verdict. You can imagine how intense that must have been.
Totally. And we even know a little about what their defense was. Turner's lawyer said she was just trying to protect her son from people trying to steal his money, like using a woman's intuition. It's not your typical defense in a fraud case.
Woman's intuition to explain wire fraud. That's, creative.
Yeah, and it didn't work. The jury wasn't buying it. But here's another interesting thing. Kingston at first said he wanted to testify, like tell his side of the story, but then he changed his mind and didn't. That's a big decision in a trial like this.
For sure. What do you think made him stay quiet?
Who knows? Maybe his lawyers thought he'd make things worse if he talked, or maybe he'd just gain cold feet. We might never know.
It is weird, though, that even though he didn't testify, the judge still let him stay out of jail until sentencing.
Yeah, the judge said that because Kingston didn't speak, he wasn't as worried about him messing with the case before sentencing. But he wasn't so chill about the mom.
Right. Judge Leibowitz straight up said he didn't believe Turner's testimony, and he thought she'd do anything for her son. That's why he sent her directly to jail. Like, he really didn't trust her.
Yeah, that was pretty clear. But get this, as Kingston was leaving court, he thanked the judge for being fair. Then he hopped into a Lamborghini Urus SUV. Talk about a contrast.
It's like a crazy movie scene. Okay, let's talk a bit about Sean Kingston, the musician. Some people might not know his music, but he had a huge hit back in the day, like 15 years ago.
Yeah, Beautiful Girls. That was everywhere in 2007. He was only 17 then. It was #1 on Billboard for a month. The song of the summer, for sure.
Oh, I remember that one. It was catchy. What made it so big?
It had this cool mix of singing and rapping, real Jamaican vibes, which was like a big influence on hip-hop back then. And it used the melody from Stand By Me, the Benny King song. Really clever.
Oh, yeah. I can hear it now. And it wasn't just big on the radio either. It blew up online too, right?
Huge. Billboard says the music video got 1 billion views on YouTube just a couple of years ago, in 2022. That shows you how much staying power it had. It's wild to think he went from that to federal fraud charges.
It really is a crazy story.
Yeah.
Makes you think about how fame and money can mess with people's heads and why it's so important to be a good person no matter who you are.
Truth. This whole thing shows what can happen when you get caught up in that world. It's a reminder for everyone, especially people in business, to be super careful, do your research, especially when you're dealing with big money and celebrities. You never know.
Yeah, it doesn't matter how famous you are, you still have to play by the rules. This conviction, even though he was a big star, shows that. And the wire fraud stuff, it just shows how easy it is to get caught up in that kind of deception.
Yeah.
What are your biggest takeaways from all this?
For me, it's the fact that the jury decided so quickly, how they both seemed to be in on it together, and how differently the judge treated them at the end. It makes you think about how family gets mixed up in legal stuff and how judges make those tough decisions.
Yeah, good points. If you're interested in learning more about all this, you could look up other cases of celebrities getting into legal trouble, or check out the details of wire fraud and what kind of punishments it carries. This case is a real-life example of what can go wrong.
And here's something to think about. In a society that worships money and fame, this case shows that even if you have all that, you're not above the law. They found him guilty really fast, which means the evidence was strong, even though he's famous.
So true. If you liked this deep dive into the Sean Kingston case, smash that like button and subscribe to POP Podcast. We're always digging into these kinds of stories where pop culture and, the real world collide. We try to make it fun and informative. Thanks for hanging out with us. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss our next deep dive. We'll be back soon with more juicy stuff.